Here we go. I am once again in my underwear, and we are about to record chapter 3 of my audiobook version of my memoir, Pravity. You get to watch. Sorry about the angle. My phone broke, and all I have is this busted old webcam. So make the best of it. Here we go. Chapter 3 Smokin' Aces. Rows and rows of cornfields waved as the cruiser sped past. I should have been focused on how to contain myself, how to compartmentalize well enough that I could survive, mostly intact, the ordeal to which I was speeding towards. But I am an idiot. Instead, I was focused entirely on Alicia Keys. I have been, at this point in my life, smoking meth every 20 minutes or so, provided I was not passed out after being awake for days at a stretch, for at least the last 3 or 4 years. My meth addiction, however, was even older, stretching back 7 or so years in total. But much like Parkinson's or the shopping habits of most everyone I know, the damaging effects were progressive. As such, I was rather incapable of correctly remembering things, not a sum total inability, mind you, but rather in a selective, circuitous fashion. Case in point, it was not really Alicia Keys whom I was trying to remember, but rather some other character whose name I do not know from the movie Smokin' Aces. Here's my thought process. For those of you who may not have seen the movie, with a peppering of spoilers, because I'm not just an idiot, I'm also an asshole. There's a character in the movie who, while in custody, manages to remove his fingerprints sufficiently that he cannot thus be identified by them. All right, had a little error there. Deep breath. Recall, intrepid reader, that I have already confessed to having purchased a new identity, but I had been arrested initially back in March of 2007, and being this was late July of 2007, law enforcement databases surely had my fingerprints on file at this point. Fuck my life. So, my genius solution? Go Alicia Keys with it. Except, the character in that movie is most definitely not Alicia Keys. She dies. But I think he does as well. Any hoodle. I held tight to the notion, not at all, because I had been smoking meth every 20 minutes for the last 4 years at this point. How dare you assume so? It's true, though. That without fingerprints, the authorities would have had to believe I was, in fact, the new identity I had purchased and asserted was me. Another spoiler, aside from that first conversation with the arresting officers, I would never actually again assert this false identity. Whoops. They booked me into a jail in Watseka, Illinois, likely because it was the nearest such facility. For the first few hours of my stay there, I was left alone, in a holding tank, my hands freed from bondage, even if the rest of me was not. What did I do with that time? I went all Alicia Keys with it. I dutifully plotted my escape, because even then, even as a meth addict, fudgeberries. I messed up like 2 paragraphs ago, and I'm going to go back and fix it. Illinois. Likely because it was the nearest such facility. Illinois. Likely because it was the nearest such facility. It must be nice to be rich enough to pay someone to do this for you. Here we go. For the first few hours of my stay there, I was left alone in a holding tank, my hands freed from bondage, even if the rest of me was not. What did I do at that time? I went all Alicia Keys with it, and I dutifully plotted my escape. Because even then, even as a meth-addicted drug dealer on the run, even then I was rather dogged in chasing what I wanted, even if it was just my own metaphoric tail. I spent the next few hours of my life attempting to scratch away my fingerprints. Follow my logic, people. 1. I have a new identity. 2. Law enforcement has my fingerprints. 3. If they match my fingerprints to what is on file, My do messed up again. My do. I said my do instead of my new. Why? My new identity will be useless. 4. I paid a lot of money for that identity. 5. I really, really wanted some meth. Now, as you can see, my logic was sound. So I meticulously searched that holding tank for surface after surface with which to scrawl away my fingerprints. I was sure if I could do that, they would have no choice but to release me, and then Caleb would surely drive to wherever I was and pick me up, and whew! That was a close one, but I'd be free. People, I do not get less stupid as this story goes on. I'm just saying. What I finally found in that tank was the rusted, slightly corroded corner of a metal table, its surface likely a sheet of rolled steel or something equivalent. That edge had been poorly painted, and thus had, over however many years of its lonely, misunderstood existence, begun to rust and rot. It was sharp. I scratched. First my thumbs. This seemed reasonable. Then one after the other, the fingertips of each hand, scratched and scratched and scratched, until I could not stand the frictive heat, and then I'd move to the next digit. Diligence, people! One must practice it, even in the most trying of times. Some hours of this effort later, my works were interrupted by the opening of the tank and a deputy or officer leading me out into the administrative area of the facility. There was another man there as well. The first wore a uniform, the second did not. The second man indicated that I should be sat next to his desk, and after making a little show of gathering papers on the desk before him, he made his first mistake. So, David, do you have a phone number? I don't have a phone, I said, keeping the triumphant feeling inside from showing on my face. Nice try, prick. I don't answer to that name, even setting aside my drug lord career. Dumbass. I had been called Frank since the first moments of my life. My father's desire to name me Bartholomew had been artfully settled by my mother, who agreed to make David my first name, if Frank was in fact my middle name, after her favorite grandfather, Frank Lessing. Once that agreement was made, my mother did what my mother always does. She simply refused to call me anything but Frank and ignored the agreement she had made with my father. This is just one in a long line of small but decisive victories for that woman. You can hold your applause to the end. Trust me, she deserves it. Still, despite the fact the man had called me David, and despite the fact I had felt a surge of joy at outwitting him, he refused to acknowledge my superiority, much less my victory. He snorted. So you admit you're David? Frank! Someone a few feet away shouts. I immediately turn in that direction. Don't! The men all chortle. What's your phone number, Frank? The same man asks me again. His smugness is such a ripe target for my impotent rage. I clam up and refuse to speak. Attorney, I said in response. I had learned a lesson. They laugh at me and take me not back to the holding tank, which I suppose in retrospect might have been a victory, to my fingernails and fingerprints at least, but rather to a small room full of racks of clothing. They order me to undress, take away my things, and issue me 2 jumpsuits, a pair of hard plastic slippers, and a blanket. Had I known then, even a fraction of what I know now, I would have understood what this meant. And no, it was not that I had given myself up at the brief interview earlier when I asserted my rights to counsel. It was the facts from the U.S. Marshals, which came in, and wonder of wonders, it had my fucking picture with it. So they did not need my fingerprints, nor any admission from me to book me. That was why this man had shouted Frank earlier. It was listed on the paperwork as my name. Oh, indeed. I was led into a barred cell, one of 4, which faced a dingy, low-ceilinged day room, with a small 21-inch CRT television mounted on a wall above a plate glass window facing the hallway, which led back to the administrative area. Below that window was a rectangular hatch, filthy with rotting food, through which all meals were handed into the unit. Since I was being booked in around 2 in the morning, the television was off, and the room was lit only by low lights along the floor. They put me in a cell with another man who woke up, registered the situation as having nothing at all to do with him, said something which included the word fuckers, and rolled over to go back to sleep. I lay down for the first time in days in something which resembled a bed, rather than the back of a stolen SUV or a couch at some stranger's place. They had not given me a pillow, so I used the second jumpsuit to create something like one, wrapped myself in a blanket meant for someone a foot shorter than I, and so that everything but my feet were covered, I lay there, thinking. I had not been given an attorney. Surely that was my right. I only knew this detail because at my initial arrest, in March of 2007, roughly 4 months before this, I had not asked for an attorney. The arresting officer, a sheriff's deputy named Chiquita Broussard, a woman with whom I had attended high school, though we had not known one another, had sat across the table from me and told me, solemn as the morning sun, "Frank, if you just tell us everything you did, you and Caleb can go home today." Needless to say, she was lying. They can do that as much as they want, because lying is not a problem unless you do it. When the police do it, it's fine. Make sense of that however you will. It will not be the first nor last time you find that moral bedrock of our society is not actually bedrock, but more like Play-Doh. Still, I believed her because I'm an idiot. We had established a rapport. And see previous paragraphs where I told you some vital truths. I had been doing a lot of meth, and I am an idiot. But here is the new data point for you. I am also extremely gullible. When I was arrested initially, I did not understand anything about jurisdictions. The extent of my knowledge came from films like Smokin' Aces and TV shows like Law and Order. Accurate, perhaps, in some fashion, precise in some others, demonstrably false when taken as a whole. But hey, I challenge you to know more in similar situations and contexts with similar amounts of meth in your system. Actually, no, I don't. See previous about being an idiot. I'm fine if you know more than me, now and or then. We're good. So, after that initial arrest, I had not been asked if I wanted an attorney. I did not have one, so the question would seem moot. The sheriff's deputies had raided my house, machine guns and all, at least 15 or more of them, one Wednesday morning after I had finally ended a multi-day meth binge with half a night's sleep. I was not running 18 miles a day on about 300 calories. I was not ready. As such, I spilled it all. I told Chiquita I would write out the statement she wanted, and I did. I ranted about how drug laws in the US are wrong. They are. And how I hadn't really done anything wrong. It's not like I had sold drugs to children. I hadn't. I briefly detailed most of what I had been doing over the 6 months prior as a drug lord, as I rose from some random guy slinging meth to moving several pounds of stuff a week. There was something approaching pride in my giving of that statement. I had just finished writing it when the phone in that interview room rang. Chiquita spoke to whomever was on the other side of that line for half a minute or so, and then handed me the phone. "It's your attorney," she said. "I don't have an attorney," I had whispered, but she did not hear it. I picked up the phone and said, "Hello?" "Frank, this is Andrew Jackson Hodges III. Your parents have retained me as your attorney. What is happening right now?" Well, they arrested Caleb and I. He's in another room, and Chiquita asked me to write out a statement so I could go home. Andrew Hodges screeched into the phone. "Did you write out a statement? Do you still have it?" Yes and yes, I replied. "Eat it!" he yelled, interrupting me. "But I didn't even sign it yet," I said, somewhat perplexed by his request, and in my head thinking, damn, my parents got me a really stupid lawyer. In that moment, Chiquita reached over and gingerly grabbed the statement, the one without my signature, and left the room. I told this to Mr. Hodges, who sighed and said, "Fine, don't say anything else. Do you understand, Frank? Do not say anything else. We're going to get you out." "What about Caleb?" "I don't know Caleb. Keep your mouth shut, Frank." And he hung up the phone. This was what I thought about as I lay there in that bed in Watseka. That conversation. I thought about how I hadn't signed that statement. How that actually hadn't mattered at all. How I just tried to scratch off my fingerprints, and how that actually hadn't mattered at all. The other guy? I was not yet thinking in terms of inmates, rolled over in his bunk and farted in his sleep. I lay there, staring up at the metal of the empty bunk above me, and I tried to reason my way out of this situation. Since I had not been given an attorney, it would have to be me doing all the reasoning. That fact alone should have shocked me into understanding just how fucked I was. But it didn't. Lest you forget, I am an idiot. There we go. Chapter 3 recorded. I hope you liked it. Bye!